we are navigating to multi-cloud environments like AWS, Azure, and I'm really happy to have all of you here today. And I'm looking forward to diving deep into the world of multi-cloud strategies and why we are using that AWS, Azure, or any other multi-cloud platforms in real time, and exploring the benefits that they offer. So, yeah, and again, thank you so much for joining. So I can see almost like more than 160 students. So thanks for your interest. So here, let's start with a quick overview of what we will be covering today, what exactly that we will be covering today. So you can see on the screen, we will begin with understanding the concepts of AWS, Azure, and what is cloud, and also multi-cloud strategies and why organizations adopt these multi-cloud approaches. So I can see you guys are hearing echo. I think hope it is fine now. Hope it is clear now. Great. So yeah, as I said that we will start with these topics like overview of AWS, Azure, multi-cloud strategies, and why organizations adopt multi-cloud approaches, and some kind of real-world case studies, and how Terraform plays an important role in the cloud engineering roles or cloud opportunities that you are trying. And as well as I just want to give a glance of why Python will be using in cloud platforms like Amazon, Azure, and all. So yeah, so we will get into the detailed overviews of these AWS, Azures, and we'll also highlight some core services and advantages. And following that, we'll compare both AWS, Azure, and moving on, we'll explore the advantages, and definitely we'll discuss some kind of important considerations and best practices for managing multi-cloud environments effectively. And as I said, at the end, we'll see some real world case studies. And finally, I'll just give you a time. I'll open the floor for questions during our Q&A session. So at that time, you can raise your hands. So at the end, at least 10 minutes, I'll allow you to raise your questions of any basic questions. So I'll definitely answer you before leaving the session. So let's see what is cloud, or what is AWS, or what is Azure. So if anyone like who joined in this webinar who is new to AWS or new to cloud, so this particular 10 minutes is for them to understand what exactly the cloud is and why people will choose using of cloud technologies. It can be AWS, it can be Azure, or it can be anything. To understand about what is cloud, so we'll just try to compare with some real-time case. For example, you all aware of Google Drive. We all know the Google Drive service. We are all aware of Google Drive. So what is Google Drive generally? Like if someone asks me what is Google Drive, so I supposed to say that Google Drive is kind of a storage where we will use um, uh, Google Drive to store my data. So where we will use Google Drive to store my data. So if someone asks me, how much data that you can store in Google Drive. So how much data that you can store it in Google Drive. So I can say that I can store unlimited data in Google Drive. So I can say that unlimited data that I can store in Google Drive. So when I talk about a Google Drive, when I talk about Google Drive, when I say that a Google Drive is through storing the data, like I can say it is a storage. When I uploaded some data inside the Google Drive, do I need to maintain any physical device with me? So the answer is no, because when I upload some data inside the Google Drive, so I don't require any physical device that need to be maintained along with me. For example, if I uploaded my data or if I copied my data in hard disk, if I copied my data in hard disk, so definitely I have to carry the hard disk along with me. Definitely I have to carry the hard disk along with me because my data is getting stored in hard disk. But when I'm using Google Drive, so I'm not going to maintain any physical device with me. So how come it possible? So it doesn't really store it in the clouds, right? So it has to store somewhere physically. So in simple terms, I can say that when I uploaded my data in Google Drive, instead of I maintain my infrastructure, service provider is maintaining. Service provider is maintaining. Instead of I maintaining my infrastructure, service provider is maintaining. Who is the service provider in this case? If I talk about service provider of Google Drive, the service provider is Google. Similarly, if I talk about Amazon Web Services, the service provider is Amazon. And if I talk about Azure, Microsoft is the service provider. For example, for you guys, if you want to add some internet connection at your home, so you'll connect to the service provider saying that like Hathway, how much it costs, or Geo, how much it costs, or anything. So you will choose based on your requirement, based on your budget. So whatever the service provider that you want, you will be choosing it and you will be using that. Similarly, even in cloud computing also, we have different service providers providing the technology. Whatever the service provider I want to use, I'll be using it and my infrastructure will be maintained by that particular service provider. Many of them who is new to IT, they can have a question that, so what they'll maintain exactly? What is mean by infrastructure? What service provider, what it is going to be maintained? If there is no cloud in the market, people supposed to maintain on-premises infrastructure. People supposed to maintain on-premises infrastructure. What is mean by on-premises infrastructure? On-premises infrastructure means if you are maintaining your infrastructure on your premises, that is called on-premises infrastructure. On premises. What do you mean by premises? The place where you live, the place where you stay, the place where you landed. So that is called your premises. In your premises, if you are maintaining your infrastructure, that is called on-premises infrastructure. Obviously, I can call it as physical infrastructure as well. If there is no cloud, people supposed to maintain physical infrastructure. Then what are the challenges of physical infrastructure? Why people are moving to the cloud? Why people are moving to the AWS? Why people are moving to the Azure? What is the reason behind that? See, let's go with very small example or a silly example that I can say. If you guys want to buy a laptop, so you will be having some requirement, right? So why I should buy a laptop? Do I need to buy laptop to watch the movies? Or do I need to buy the laptop to do the video editing or photo editing? or to play games. Based on your requirement, your hardware will be there. So whenever you're talking about very small example like with like a laptop, if I want to buy a laptop to watch movies, I can get the laptop in 30,000. If I want to buy a laptop to just do the photo editing or video editing, so I required some RAM, memory, so that I'm expecting. Because without that, my application may not work in my laptop. So definitely I'll go with whatever the configuration that I needed. So I'll go with that. So here, when I'm talking about very small example, we are getting at around 10,000 rupees difference. For example, if I'm talking about a huge infrastructure, if I'm talking about an infrastructure like Abibus or any bank or any other IRCTC or anything, if I feel that if I'm getting a project, I'll procure the whole hardware. Hardware means it can be a server, switches, routers, cables, air conditioner. There should be a room to maintain that. There should be an admin to maintain that. There will be a power bill. There will be a power bill. And, obviously we should have. So obviously we should have along with power bill, and we should have a power backup as well. We should have a power backup as well. So including all that, I can say that it is very huge investment. After putting a lot of investment, if I didn't get the project, or if I didn't get a project what I expected, so all my investment will goes wrong. In those cases, instead of you investing the money, for example, if I want to store the data in Google Drive, I don't need to pay anything upfront. I don't need to pay anything upfront because it is pay as you go model. How much I store, I'll pay for that. How much I use, I'll pay for it. Because I don't need to pay anything upfront, or I don't need to buy anything hardware here. But if it is a physical infrastructure, you have to buy the hard disk. Even though if you are using it 100%, that doesn't matter. You have to buy for it. And if you are not using it, it will be waste of the money, right? Similarly, even in infrastructure also, if you procure the infrastructure and if you are not using it, obviously, yeah, so it is waste of money. So here, instead of you maintaining your physical infrastructure, you don't need to invest anything, you don't need to buy anything. Your service provider will have a huge infrastructure, use physical infrastructure, and you can take it as a rental basis. For example, I required I required a machine. I required a machine with two CPUs, 8 GB memory or something. So I can take it for a rental. I can create a server. And that is the reason we always say that cloud computing is pay as you go model. How much you use, you will pay for it. It can be AWS, it can be Azure, or it can be any other cloud platform. It is a pay as you go model. If I'm creating a server in cloud, if I'm running the server for 30 minutes, or if I'm running the server for 120 hours, I'll be paying for 120 hours. If I'm running server 24 by 7, 365 days, I'll be paying for it. Similarly, each and every service, we will call it as a pay as you go model. If I want to store data, like if I want to store 100 GB of data in my AWS or in my Azure, I'll be paying for that. I'll not be paying for what I'm not storing here. For example, in the month one, if I store 100 GB of data, and in month two, if I store 200 GB data, for first month you'll be paying for 100 GB. For second month you'll be paying for 200 GB. So that's how we always say that cloud is a pay as you go model. How much you use, you'll pay for it. You don't need to maintain any physical infrastructure on your premises. Simply whatever you want, you can create it virtually and service provider will take care of that maintenance. You just need to pay what you have used. So that is called cloud. AWS, Amazon Web Services, Azure, AWS provided by Amazon, and Azure provided by Microsoft. These are the two different leading cloud platforms that we have in the market right now. So here, not just creating of a server or not just creating of a storage in either AWS or Azure. These are not only the services which the cloud service providers are providing. So many people will get confused when they're talking about cloud or when they're talking about AWS. Simply, simply. So other guys, can you hear me, right? So please confirm me. Can you guys hear me or not? So I can see that. Yeah. So Radhika, please check your from your end so other can able to hear me. So people who have questions, just keep it with you. I'll allow you to talk at the end. Okay. I'll give you 10 minutes time to, answer all your questions. So yeah, so many people will think that when they were talking about cloud or when they're talking about Amazon Web Services or when they're talking about Azure, it is just for storage or it is just for creating a service. The answer is no. AWS or Azure widely it has many services, many services, hundreds of services that we have. Learning of AWS or learning of Azure is nothing but learning of those services. For each and every real-time use case, there is a service which is available in cloud platforms like AWS or Azure. So we will just learn that way to use that service and how to use that service. For example, if you look at any real-time example like abibus.com or irctc.com, definitely they will have a network, they will have a server, and people from outside, they will access to the server. So here in AWS or Azure, we will be having a service to create this network. We will be having a service to create the server. We will be having a service to monitor this survey service or a server, and which helps to route the traffic. We will have a service for load balancing. We will have a service for auto scaling. We will have a service for each and everything end to end. For each and every IT need, we will have a service in AWS or in Azure. So what we do is, people who are learning AWS or people who are learning Azure, so we will pick up the services. Okay, this particular service is there. So for which need it is launched and in which use cases that we can use it. And yes, how to configure it. So doing of these, like how to use, where to use. These are the two principles of learning a cloud computing. It can be AWS or it can be Azure. If anyone asks you, what is cloud? Cloud is a fully furnished house for an IT infrastructure. Simply, simply, cloud is a fully furnished house for an IT infrastructure. There are a lot of services available in cloud. So based on our use case, whatever the service that we required, we will be picking up that service and we will be using the service. If I want to store the data, I have a service. If I want to create a server, I have a service. If I want to create a network, I have a service. If I want to share the traffic between the servers, I have a service. If suddenly traffic increases, if two servers are not able to handle the traffic, suddenly I wanted to increase up to three servers or four servers, I have a service. To monitor, I have a service. To create a database, I have a service. To create a data warehouse, I have a service. For each and every use case, there is a service available in cloud platforms in AWS or Azure or any other leading cloud platforms. So if anyone asks you after this webinar, like what is cloud computing, what you have learned, simply cloud is a fully furnished house for an IT infrastructure where a lot of services available in cloud. Learning of cloud is nothing but way to use, how to use. We have a lot of services available. So which service will be used in which use case? So learning of that is nothing but learning of cloud platform. So this is about cloud. And along with what is cloud, I'm using just, I just want to say this, I'm using a terminology called server, because many people who are in IT, who are not in IT, sorry, who are not in IT, or, they might confuse about what is a server. See, server is nothing but a machine where you will host your application servers, database servers, all these things. Okay, server is nothing but a machine, a big machine where you'll host our applications and everything. Simply, I can say that, for example, if you have a bottle, if you have a just bottle, if you fill this bottle with water, you will always call it as water bottle. If you fill this bottle with drink, you will call it as a drink bottle, right? Similarly, when there is a machine, when there is a machine, if you installed application on this, you will call it as application server. If you install database on it, you will call it as a database server. That's it. So don't get confused when I'm talking about server. Server is just a machine. It's a computer with huge configuration. The place where you can launch your applications and all, which will run your applications and all. So all that is nothing but a server. Let me clear the board. Then, so then why would organizations consider adopting of multiple cloud approach? So you can ask me a question that, sir, you said that, like, yeah, AWS is good enough or Azure is good enough, where we are getting a lot of services available in cloud platforms, as you said. Why can't they use a single cloud platform? Why they want to use a multiple uh, cloud platforms? Why should they use? Because as you said, yeah, AWS is your GCP or Azure is a fully furnished house. Then why these organizations are adopting multi-cloud approaches? Why they are using two cloud platforms at a time? Yeah. So in simple terms, you know, multi-cloud strategies. When you talk about multi-cloud strategy, multi-cloud strategy involves using of multiple cloud service providers in your organization to meet your requirements. So many things in many organizations nowadays, they were not getting stick to one single cloud platform. They were using multiple cloud platforms within the project, within the client. So we call it as multi-cloud strategy. Okay. The multi-cloud strategy is nothing but involves multi-cloud service providers like AWS, Azure, to meet an organization's IT requirement. So there are a lot of reasons for that, like, avoiding vendor lock-in, high availability, disaster recovery, performance, and all. And also, to understand that, we can also go that. One second, guys. Let me share my screen again. Yeah. So when I talk about, just let me put it in a presentation mode. Bear with me. Yeah. So let's see about multi-cloud strategies first. So when I talk about multi-strategies, we have different cloud strategies. Like the reason why people use, or why the reason why people follow multi-cloud strategies is, one is flexibility. Flexibility means, uh, because of using multiple cloud providers, organizations will gain the flexibility to choose any of the service for their specific needs. For example, I may have a multiple requirements, right? So basically, if I'm working on a particular project, so I might have a multiple requirements, and I might feel that, okay, for this requirement, a service which is in AWS will be best fit. And for this requirement, I may feel that the service which is available in Azure, might fit for that. So in these cases, we don't need to constrain the limitations to a single provider like AWS or single Azure. So because of that, so I can use any of the service in any of the cloud platforms which I'm going to maintain. So that comes under a flexibility. So redundancy is nothing but if I feel that if something goes wrong, if something goes wrong, and if I feel that one cloud service provider goes down, 99.99%, 100%, it won't happen. But again, for safety or for security or durability or availability, if one cloud provider experiences any downtime or any issues, the organization can easily switch to the another provider. You know, it can ensure any continuous operations so that it won't have any issues or it won't need to stick with one particular cloud platform. So flexibility is nothing but for their requirement. For one requirement, if they wanted to use the service which is in AWS, for other requirement, if they wanted to use service in any other cloud platform, they can easily use it. And also coming to the redundancy part, if one service provider goes down, if it is having any downtime, they don't need to rely on that. So they have the other cloud platform in their hand. And also, if I look at optimized spending, the pricing will be completely different between two cloud platforms and for each service as well. For example, if I want to create a server in AWS, the pricing may different. Or if I want to use any other service in Azure, the pricing may different. If I feel that if I wanted to use a 10 AWS services or 10 GCP services or 10 Azure services. So what I can say is if the top five services which I'm going to use in AWS is going for a less cost and the other services which are less cost in Azure. So that I can switch to the different cloud platforms and whatever the service that I want it from AWS and whatever the service that I want from Azure, I can easily use that. So that comes under uh, optimized spending. And unique features. Yeah, each and every cloud provider will have a unique feature or unique tool or unique services, right? So with this multi-cloud strategy, the organization can easily leverage these unique capabilities so to enhance their IT infrastructure and the operations. So for my IT infrastructure and for my operations, I feel that this particular unique feature from this particular cloud provider will help us. So definitely I'll go with that. And I can say that we have, because of going with these multi-cloud strategies, like it can be a flexibility or it can be a redundancy or it can be a unique features or it can be an optimized spending. So we have different advantages also. Like we don't need to lock with a particular vendor significantly whenever we want, or we can easily go with that. So there won't be any constraint that you should be with only this vendor. Like this is one of the significant advantage that I can say. Uh, the organization are not tied up with a single provider, can leverage the services from multiple providers based on the specific needs. So this avoids this vendor lock-in. I don't need to lock with one single provider. And also, yes, if one is go down, the other one will be up, right? So that is called high availability. So workloads, if something happens, or if some region or data center which goes down from one cloud platform, so the other cloud platform will be there. And disaster recovery. So this comes under same. If there is any major outage or any disaster that affecting one cloud provider, so our organization can easily switch to another cloud provider. You know, we don't need to stop our business, so we can easily continue to that. And there won't be any downtime and there will be a good performance for it. Clear? So this is about vendor cloud platform. And yeah, like cost of performance tuning, cost optimizations are common. So performance tuning is nothing but we will be distributing the workloads across multiple clouds so that the organization can optimize the performance so that we won't have any issues with the performance as well. For example, if I say that if there is a company A, if this can be an example of disaster recovery and high availability. So a company and there is a company and it is implemented a multi-cloud strategy. It is using AWS and Azure for disaster recovery and high availability. Critical workloads, what they have, critical workloads, what they have. So they will be replicated across both AWS and Azure, so that uh, you know, uh, even though in the if one workload goes down, the other critical workloads will be available in other cloud platform, so that they won't be have any issues. So we with the help of disaster recovery and cost optimization, so everywhere these multiple cloud platforms will help us. So that is the reason everyone is using these multiple cloud platforms, especially recently, like nowadays, uh, with the help of lot of new improvements, or business needs or keep on changing quickly. So we wanted to make it flexible, and and we can see like more businesses are using the multi-cloud platforms instead of just using one particular cloud platform. And no single cloud provider can have everything. No single cloud, because uh, sure, Ramya, we will share the recording as well. So no single provider, has everything a business needs. Each one has its own strength. It can be a good computing power or a storage options or AI features, and they might have a data centers in different parts of the world. So the business, we are picking up and we are choosing the best parts from the different providers, and that helps to perform better and stay secure. And because of cost optimization, we are saving the money, and because of performance tuning, we will be having a low latency and high availability. So we will be having all that. So we also can call it as cross for cloud as well. So instead of calling it as multi cloud approach, we also call it as a cross cloud multi approach. So when we have a multi cloud platforms, when I wanted to deploy uh, infrastructure in multiple cloud platforms, like it can be AWS or it can be Azure. So there is an option called Terraform. Terraform is an IaC, which is infrastructure as a code, which is infrastructure as a code. So here, let me take the control. So here we can use AWS or we can use Azure. So many organizations, probably they're going with AWS and Azure. So I already told you the reasons why people will use AWS and Azure. So we will call it as multi-cloud strategy with the kind of high availability, or flexibility and redundancy, security. So we have a different uh, things that we can follow because of this multi-cloud approach. Whenever I'm using this AWS or Azure, so I should able to create infrastructure in these two cloud platforms. So in the cloud platform AWS, we have an Azure, and the cloud platform Azure, we have a infrastructure. It will be difficult to log into these cloud platforms. For example, if you want to upload some data into the Google Drive, what you will do? You'll just create a Google account. You'll create a Google account and you log into the Google account and you'll upload the data. The same thing if you want to create infrastructure in AWS or Azure. So you should create an account. You should log in into the account. So this you will call it as console. So I'll show you the console at the end of our session. Console is nothing but, for example, if you want to order something from your Flipkart, you'll create a Flipkart account. You will log in into the Flipkart account and you can see all the products which are available in the Flipkart account, right? Similarly, even with AWS or Azure, if you want to create something virtually, you'll be creating AWS account or Azure account, and you'll be logging into the account, and that we'll call it as console. Console is not an AWS terminology or not an Azure terminology. It is just a generic word. So you will log in into the AWS console or Azure console and you will create the infra. So you can monitor all the time, like what infrastructure, which is created by whom, when, everything. But no one in organizations will log in into the AWS account, will log in into the Azure accounts and create the infrastructure manually. People will not do that. People will always follow IaC, which is infrastructure as a code. Okay, I'm just repeating it again, guys. Cloud is a platform where you can create any service virtually. But nowadays, organizations are going with multi-cloud approach. So multi-cloud approach means we have a lot of advantages of using multi-cloud approach, lot of strategies that we have because of using multi-cloud approach. If something goes wrong to the any data center in one cloud platform, the other cloud platform's data center will be there. And if I'm having a requirement in my project saying that a particular service which costs 10 rupees in AWS, 8 rupees in Azure, I can go with an Azure. And along with that, if I feel that any unique feature that which is providing by particular cloud platform, which is very good, so I'll go with a particular cloud platform. And at the same time, if something happens to one data center in AWS, if my critical workloads are also in the Azure without any downtime, I can continue with my business. So there are a lot of advantages of using AWS and Azure at a time in organizations. And along with that, to create the infrastructure in both AWS and Azure, we won't create it manually. It will be difficult for us to create it manually, logging into the AWS consoles, logging into the Azure console, creating the infrastructure and tracking that who created that, when created that. And there are a lot of manual mistakes can be done. And for example, if I created something and if I wanted to repeat that for next time, again, same time that I have to spend it on that. But in organizations, people never ever do this manually. They'll always go with infrastructure as a code. Infrastructure as a code means it can be deployed code. Infrastructure can be created or deployed through code. That is called IaC. And Terraform is a tool from HashiCorp where we can do this IaC, infrastructure as a code. So here, when I talk about IaC, AWS and Azure will also offers a separate services within the cloud platforms. For example, cloud formation in AWS, Azure ARM templates in Azure. So, but this cloud formation, using of this cloud formation, you can create infrastructure only in AWS. And using of Azure ARM platforms, you can create infrastructure only in Azure. But here using of Terraform, you can create infrastructure in both AWS and Azure as well. If you want to deploy it at a time, you can also deploy it. So this Terraform will supports multiple cloud platforms. It can be AWS, it can be Azure, and it not only AWS and Azure, it also supports GCP as well. So because of using this Terraform, for example, if I want to create 10 servers, so I can write a piece of code, I can deploy it. Later on, if I want to deploy it again 5 servers or 10 servers, I don't need to log in into the AWS console or Azure console, or I don't need to modify the code. I can just simply change the values and deploying the same code again. So that is called reusability. So what is mean by Terraform? Terraform is an IaC, which is infrastructure as a code. And using of Terraform, we can create an infrastructure and we can reuse the code, reusability. And the third one, we can also track the resources. We can also track the resources. Tracking the resources, saying that using of a state file. So simply by looking at the state file, I can see that I can say that who created the infrastructure. I mean, what they created the infrastructure. I know, do I need to modify anything in that? So we can do the changes without logging into the AWS console, and we can change it from the outside and we can redeploy it. That is called Terraform. Terraform is an infrastructure as a code. So we can deploy the infrastructure we can deploy the infrastructure in both cloud platforms at a time or else individually, and we can reuse the templates and we can do it. So that is called Terraform. So let's say about Python. Then many people will ask that, sir, if I want to learn cloud, so what is the best choice? Like, what will be the best combination? Like, how I'll get the job? What opportunities were there in the market? So here, when I talk about opportunities, we have a lot of combinations. So the best combination that I always say is AWS, Azure, and with one scripting kind of a Python. And if Terraform is there, it's too good. So the reason of using multi-cloud, I already explained you. So why to learn multi-cloud? The reason of learning of multi-cloud is the organizations were using multiple cloud platforms within the project, so that they are looking for the candidates who are having the knowledge on multiple cloud platforms. And when you have knowledge on multiple cloud platforms like AWS and Azure, in future, if they ask you to work on GCP also, you can easily work on it. So that the organizations are looking for the candidates who are having the multiple cloud platforms. Along with that, deploying the infrastructure in these multiple cloud platforms, we discussed about Terraform. So using of Terraform, you can deploy the infrastructure either in AWS or either in Azure. So whatever that we learn in this webinar is, first of all, we understood about what is cloud, and then we understood about the reason people are using multi-cloud and why we have to learn multi-cloud, because the organizations were using multi-cloud platforms because they have their requirements, and for their requirements, for some use cases the best fit is AWS, for some use cases the best fit is Azure, so that we should be well versed with both cloud platforms, and it is good to have. And to deploy the infrastructure in multiple cloud platforms, we will go with Terraform. And then why Python comes into this picture? And you might have doubt that to learn this multi-cloud platform or to learn AWS or GCP, do we require Python mandatory? I couldn't say that Python is mandatory, but Python is very great advantage. There is no dependency that we should learn Python to learn AWS and Azure. But I can say that Python is very big advantage if you are having along with your cloud platforms. So the requirement I'll tell you. For example, the real-time use case. I have in my organization, I have one AWS account and I have one Azure account. I have one AWS account and I have one Azure account. And I have one server in AWS account and I have one server in Azure account. In AWS, we will call it as EC2 service, and here we'll call it as virtual machine. So the difference is here we'll call it as instance, EC2 instance, we'll call it as Azure. These servers will have a firewall. We will call it as security group. We will call it as firewall in Azure. Okay, the names are different, but the use case is same. Let's try to understand where Python will help us. If I have, this is one of the real-time use case, guys. When I have multiple cloud accounts, and I can say that I have an AWS EC2 instance, it means AWS server, and I have a virtual machine, which is an Azure virtual machine, and I have a security group attached to it, and I have a firewall to attach. So there are certain rules will be allowed in the security groups. There are certain rules will be allowed in the security groups. So as I said that my company is having a requirement. For example, if my company is Naresh IT, I have a security group. I have a firewall, Naresh IT. I have allowed rules, whatever that I required. I have removed all the unnecessary rules and I have just allowed traffic or allowed rules what I required. My requirement is in AWS or in Azure, whoever creates a machine, whoever creates a server, my Naresh IT firewall should automatically attach to them. Because when coming to the organizations, we have a different environments like development environment, sandbox environment, test environment, prod environment. We have a different environments. So when we have a different environments, people can always sign in into the sandbox, or people always can sign in into the dev environment, or people can always sign in into the different environments. And many people we have in the organization, they can spin up a servers. Every time when they spin up a server and they were adding the firewall what they required or what they want, it violates the organization rules, right? So my organizations defined a firewall. In cloud, we can call it a security group or a firewall, which we are attaching it to the server. So my requirement is to attach to this newly created servers automatically, because I can't go to each and everyone individually, and I can't say that if you create a server, attach this firewall. If you create a server, attach this firewall. I can't say that. It will be difficult, and I'm not sure whether they followed it or not. But I have to just make it strict that whoever creates a server, automatically the firewall will attach to that. In this kind of automations, Python can comes into the picture. So this is one of the automation that I'm saying. This is not only the automation, this is one of the automation. I can write a Python script here. I can write a Python script saying that whenever a new server creates, automatically, whenever a new server creates, automatically, whatever the script that I have written, this should get executed. And it should attach this security group to these servers. So that is what my requirement. So I have written a script. Do you think like the way how you write the script outside, in the same way we write it in cloud as well? We will write it in cloud as well in the same way, but the modules which we are using will be different. Because Python doesn't know what is AWS. Python don't know what is an EC2 instance. Python don't know what is Azure virtual machine. It should understand the language of AWS, right? So that we will be using a different modules. Python script we will be writing. So here, while writing a script, Boto 3 is an AWS SDK. Azure MGMT is for Azure module. Whenever you are writing the script for AWS, you will be importing this Boto 3. Whenever you are writing the script for Azure virtual machine, you will be importing this Azure MGMT. And you will be writing these two scripts, for example. Okay, I have written the script. When the script runs, it automatically take the server ID or instance ID and attach the firewall. One script for AWS and one script for Azure. Then how I can execute this script? Again, do I need to install something on my personal laptop, and do I need to authenticate between two cloud platforms, and do I need to run it? The answer is no, because we have a services in both AWS and Azure to execute the scripts. It can be a Python script or it can be any other script. Okay, if it is AWS, we have a service called Lambda. And if it is Azure, we have a service called Azure Functions. Okay. These services in cloud platforms will help us to execute our script. Simply we can place our script in the Lambda, and if you want, you can schedule it, or if you want to trigger the script whenever a new instance got created, you can also do that. In our case, we wanted to trigger the script whenever a new instance got created. Like, I don't want to schedule it. Whenever a new server created, automatically this Python script should get triggered, and it automatically should take the ID of that machine, and it should check whether this security group is there or not. If not, it should attach the security group. That's what both Lambda and Azure functions will do it. These two are, we will call it as serverless services. The reason why we will call it as serverless services is, for example, if I wanted to run a Python script, what is the basic need that I should have, a machine that I should have? I should install Python on it. Then I should create a script inside that machine and I can execute the script. But here, you don't need to have any machine with you. You don't need to create any virtual machine in cloud platforms. Simply you can go to, or you can navigate to the service, this Lambda or Azure function. You can create, you can place your script and it should executes without creating any external servers for us. We don't need to bear any cost for server cost here. So that is the reason we will call it as serverless. That is the reason we will call it as serverless. So not just this particular automation, we have many automations. So that is the reason knowledge on Python is very good advantage of both AWS and Azure cloud platforms. And that is not a dependency again. I'm not saying that if you learn Python, then only you can learn AWS or Azure. Learning AWS, Azure, learning Terraform, learning Python, it's a good, obviously a good profile that, having a multi-cloud and having a scripting knowledge. So here, when I talk about automations, so the automation which I explained now is when there are two different cloud platforms, when there are two different machines in our cloud platforms, and the requirement is like I want to attach a firewall to these machines whenever the machine's created. So not a single machine. In future, if a new machine created, automatically this firewall should attach to that. In those cases, the Python plays a very crucial role. And I don't say that this Lambda service and this Azure function will allow you to run only Python script. Almost like 10 to 12 scripting languages it's allow you to execute. But the combination that AWS plus Python and Azure plus Python is using in the market a lot. In this webinar, I'm mostly focusing on what people are using in the market, what people are using in the organizations. Just bring it to your notice so that you can create your profile accordingly. So my motto is to explain that about a multi-cloud and Terraform and a Python where it is being used. So this is one of the automation that I can say. And the best combination, like I can't say that AWS Java, AWS .NET or Azure plus Java and all. Mostly in organizations, people will use Python. I'm not saying that people will only use Python. Mostly people will use Python. So this is one of the automations. Along with that, if I talk about any other automation, uh, there is a service called in IAM. There is a service called IAM. In both AWS and in Azure, we have a service called IAM. Here, I'm not getting in depth of this service. I'm saying that we can create some keys in this IAM. These keys will get expired for 90 days or for 1 month or 2 months. There will be a certain time period. So one of the real-time use case that I came across in my real time. So the organization requirement is we are creating a keys in both AWS and in Azure, but we are not getting an alert when these keys are getting expired. So we have to know. So we have to get the notification or we have to get something informed, whenever the keys are getting expired. In those cases, again, this Python, this AWS Lambda and Azure functions will comes into the picture. So I can write a Python script where I can schedule it. It should run every 10 days or something. And whenever it executed, so automatically, whenever this Python script executed, automatically it will verify the keys, whether the keys are getting expired or not. And automatically, if it is getting expired, it gives a notification for me. So using of multi-cloud, using of Terraform, and using of Python also, you have seen the use cases, right? So after creating an infrastructure, if you want to monitor something or if you want to make an eye on something, so these automations will also help using of this Python. Let me clear the board. Yeah. So this is about why we use Python in cloud and the few automations which I explained. And Boto 3 Yes, Boto 3 is an SDK, and Azure MGMT is also an SDK. These are two modules. Whenever you are writing a script, you will be importing the script. And coming to the organizations and interviews point of view, yes, I can say that multi-cloud with Python or multi-cloud with DevOps like Terraform. So it will be a really helpful for you, to get the job easily. And if I talk about a pipelines, if I talk about a pipelines, so whenever we might write, whenever we might write a Terraform script or anything, whenever we might write a Terraform script or anything. So basically, we will store this Terraform script in any source code repositories, SCM. From there, using of Terraform Enterprise, we will deploy it into the cloud platforms like AWS or Azure. Okay. So source code management is nothing but GitHub or Bitbucket, these things. Clear? So now I'll just allow you guys to answer your question. I mean, ask your questions. So please raise your hand if you have any question. I'll allow you to talk. Yes, Begum, I allowed you to talk.
Yeah, hi. I kind of know Python, so and I have done AWS certification. It's just that I haven't worked on it.
Okay.
When you say Boto, which is the, I mean, when you learn something, you just go to the console and click, and then it's how it works.
Yes.
So when you are using to have to do this automation, that's where the problem comes in because you have not never used Boto, and I have similar problem with my interviews. So what is the best way around to learn this Boto and Azure management, and
Yeah.
how to get the hands-on with that?
Yes. So let me just show this consoles also once. Let me share my screen once, and then I'll answer you the question. Okay. Let me show you that both AWS console and Azure console as well once. Let me share the screen. Yeah. So hope you all guys can see my screen. Yeah. So this is the AWS console. Um, so whenever we logged into the AWS console, we can see all the services which are available. And this is the Azure console, AWS Azure console, and these are all the services which are, you can see storage, load balancers, virtual machines, and all in Azure. This is called console, and this is AWS console. And coming to your question, Mumtaz, so how you can do this best practices is, see, first thing, since you know the Python, that is a great advantage to you to do the best practices. Try to be good at both AWS and Azure. Whatever the steps that we are doing it manually, whatever the steps that we are doing it manually, because and take the use case. For example, there is a use case. I have an EC2 instance in AWS, and I want to start this instance automatically morning at 9 o'clock, and I want to stop the instance automatically at evening 10 o'clock or something. Take this use case and look at the script. So, for example, just if you can type it in the Google, like for the sample scripts, uh, since you already know the Python. So how they have written, how they have connected from, how they imported the module first, then how they have connected to the client, EC2 client, using of a few lines, and after that defining a function. And to start the instance or to stop the instance, we have a Boto 3 documentation. So if you can just go to the Google, we have official Boto 3 documentations. If you already know Python, so this Boto 3 documentation will really help you. So Boto 3. So if I go to the Boto 3 documentation, see, for example, if I wanted to some Amazon EC2 examples, managing Amazon EC. Say, for example, if I want to start the instance, so you can see, right? So the first, scroll down. So this is the response to get the information from that. Okay. And in the first line, as you know, they will be importing the, so this is the line which they always use to start the instance. And in this, whatever the terminology that you should use, so all the syntax will be there in this Boto 3. So just we have to do only one thing. You have to apply the Terraform syntax here, and you have to write this. Take the use cases and then practice. So the use case which I have given to you now is automatically start the instance morning 10 o'clock and stop the instance at evening 10 o'clock. Take that use case and execute the script using of a Lambda service and schedule the Lambda function and do that. So that's how you have to take the use cases and you have to do it. Clear, Muntaz? Aruna Kumari, I allowed you to talk.
Yeah, hello, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm actually from, working in mainframe applications, and I've opted to, learn the AWS DevOps. So if I wanted to, get practiced into it, how, how I can, put my mainframe experience, or, if I wanted to get some use cases of out of my mainframes experience into AWS, do we have any kind of, hints or something like that? Because
Yeah.
wherever we have all outside, it is something like, if cloud is there, and because all the legacy applications are trying to get migrated to cloud,
Yes.
Terraforms, and
So what you'll do is, I always prefer, like, since you have an experience or since you are a fresher, I always prefer the multi-cloud first. Okay. And along with multi-cloud, what I prefer is, since you want to showcase your experience, so you are in the organization and you're working on some other cloud technology, and will take up the use cases of migrating your existing workloads to the cloud platform, so that you can say that, so I started my career with Azure, and now we are migrating from on premises to cloud, and we will be taking up a projects or taking up a use cases on how to migrate an application, or how to migrate a storage, or how to migrate a server from on prem to cloud, and learn about more about the networking part. Because since we are doing anything from the scratch, so networking part is very important part, right? So because
Right.
without creating a network, we can't spin up a new server and we can't migrate our existing server to the cloud. Because when you are trying to migrate from on-prem to cloud, so most of the networking topics will be involved in it, like VPN, peering, transit gateways. So these all concentrate on the networking part and concentrate how you will be migrating your existing workload to the on-premises to cloud, and showcase that experience in your resume, so that you can say that you're not far away from the mainframes, you're working with mainframes, also you are in the part of migrating your existing applications to cloud and
Right.
creating it from the very scratch.
Okay. Got it.
Clear? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let me just read one few questions from online. Um, if we are learning cloud, AWS, Java is not much important respect to Python. So I'm not saying that it is not important, but I'm just saying that according to the market, Python, AWS plus Python, AWS plus Azure plus Python, we have a lot of roles. So that is the reason that I just want to showcase that. Duration of the course and all, please reach out to the admin. So should I learn multi-cloud or go with single cloud as a beginner? So as a beginner, I mean, since you are a beginner or since you're experienced, so to get more opportunities, so multi-cloud will be the best choice. So when you have multi-cloud in your resume, so there will be a difference between you and the other person who came to the interview. So that, organizations, so it attracts the organizations or interviewer, so that it will be easy to get the job. So I prefer multi-cloud. Azure Functions is there, no issues. Yeah, uh, Sakshi, AWS plus Python is important, is enough, but Azure is not difficult. Until you get into that Azure, you feel that Azure is a separate course. But when we are discussing Azure, you feel that, okay, like, you'll be confident with multiple cloud. So that since the organizations are AWS plus Python is enough, but always what I believe is, when you're searching for an interview or when you're doing something, always there should be a primary skill which is very good, and the secondary skill. What I feel is, cloud is always our primary skill, AWS and Azure, and Python on other any DevOps technology will always be your secondary skills, so that you'll be having your resume strong. Yeah, Sonu Reddy, we are talking about the cloud engineer only till now. So yes, if you have Java, if you are very good at Java, don't jump into the Python again. Go with AWS plus Azure and just see how you will be running your JavaScript in your cloud. If you are very good at Java, don't again jump into the Python. AWS